I've worked in wildlife conservation and farming for most of my career. I started in the Ministry of Agriculture when I was 16 years of age, working animal welfare and legal prosecution work for many areas where farmers were finding it difficult or were just not looking after their animals properly. And I do have a lot of sympathy for the farming industry. I do understand that bovine TB is a problem. It's a problem for farmers, an economic problem. It's a problem for taxpayers as well. But killing badgers is not the solution. And until farmers stop killing badgers, we're never going to be able to deal with this problem properly. We're never going to be able to really tackle what needs to be done long term to help both farmers and our wildlife. And that's what the politicians in there really need to start thinking about. There is no one in that chamber today, no one, that doesn't have all the facts at their fingertips to tell them that this badger cull has been a complete and utter disaster on economic grounds, on animal welfare grounds and on scientific grounds. Let's be clear about what we do know. Yes, Owen Paterson will not move beyond his brief. Owen Paterson is probably the most incompetent and arrogant politician of his generation. It's a dangerous combination, all right? But we've got around Owen Paterson because we've got to all these dirty little secrets and we've got him out in the open. That's why he's gone to ground like Lord Lucan and he's putting his friend George Eustace up with a 60-seat majority that's toast to the next election anyway, to try and defend this disaster of a policy in there today. Yeah. Okay? Owen Paterson 12 months ago was so gung-ho. He was giving interviews to the Sunday Times saying, we're going to go out, we're going to kill badgers, we've got 40 zones, we're going to kill hundreds of thousands of them. And I'm ready to go. I'm not going to be pushed aside. I'm not going to all these honey, bunny, buggy, honey, whatever you're going, out there going to stop me. I'm going to do it. But where is he now? He's gone to ground. He's not made public mention on this for months. He's got no guts, he's got no courage. He refuses to come out and debate people like me and others who can actually have a decent discussion with him on the science and the environmental issues around this policy. And that says an awful lot about how bad it is. Let's be clear. How much did it cost to kill just over 1,800 badgers in Somerset and Gloucestershire last year? Cost probably the best part of £10 million. That's almost £5,000 a badger. Okay, we had police forces from around the country. Rather than looking after homes and dealing with burglaries and crime, we're actually chasing people like you around to stop you killing wildlife. Absolute ludicrous. Absolute helicopters up. You know, following members of the Women's Institute around fields at huge cost of about £5,000–6,000 an hour. Okay, we've got civil servants, teams of civil servants working on all your freedom of information requests. They're costing hundreds and hundreds of thousands of pounds because you're asking all these sensible questions and they can't keep up with all the lies. They have to keep going back over to make sure they've given you the answer that you think you should have had but you never did get. So this whole thing is completely ludicrous. All the MPs in there know that. They know that it cost a fortune. They also know that none of those badgers, to a large degree, probably had TB. Okay? They never tested one of them. Because Owen Paterson damn well knew that if he'd have tested those animals, a vast majority of them, probably 95–96%, would not have had TB. But we learn by freedom of information request that actually some landowners did have some of those badgers tested. And the taxpayer also paid for that. But again, DEFRA's not released the results. I wonder why. Do I have to be Sherlock Holmes to reckon there isn't any TB badgers in that group they've tested? If there was, Owen Paterson would be up here now, jumping up and down, telling you he has to kill them all. The fact of the matter is, the vast majority of badgers being killed in Somerset and Gloucestershire last year had no disease at all. The randomised badger cull that the last Labour government did was the best piece of peer-reviewed science anywhere in the world on badger culling. It cost over £50 million. It took over 8 years. It took 11,000 dead badgers to get to the end of that particular piece of research. You've got the answer. Badger culling will make no significant contribution to reducing bovine TB. Now you can dress up the report, you can dissect it, you can draw different conclusions, but that was the key recommendation that all the scientists, Lord Krebs and others, that were all very well respected in their field, not just here, but around the world, signed up to. Now David Cameron had a chance in opposition to accept those findings. His Agriculture Minister, Shadow Agriculture Minister Jim Pace at the time, had the chance to accept it. But they didn't. They didn't accept it because they disagreed with the science. They didn't accept it because they had taken a political decision. They had worked with the National Farmers Union, they'd worked with the Countryside Alliance, and they had decided that there were votes and there was support in the party to get this badger cull on the table. And to do that, they had to push all that science, all that taxpayers' money, all those dead badgers aside, and just go on with the cull. When they came into office as a coalition, we had 6 different vaccination projects. around the country, funded by FERA, and using government expertise and knowledge to vaccinate badgers. Immediately, Jim Pace, the Agriculture Minister, put it down to 1. Okay, and that was a clear sign that they didn't want to know anymore about the issue of vaccinating badgers. It was full steam ahead with killing these animals. So they got their badger cull. They got the chance to prove it could work, and it's failed. £10 million is a huge waste of money. We also know that it was very inhumane. They've been trying to hide the evidence on the humaneness for months. They didn't even want to release the criteria about how they would monitor humaneness. They didn't want to tell us how many people were out there. We probably had about 4 monitors to cover 2 areas of the Isle of Wight for people that were shooting these badgers. As I said in other speeches, you'd have more chance of finding Lord Lucan out there than finding a monitor to deal with this cull. And the trouble is that we know from the leaked report that came out through the BBC a few weeks ago that many of those animals were not monitored when they were being shot. And even the few that were, there were serious questions about what actually went on. Some of those animals were wounded and they died long, painful deaths, well over the 5 minutes criteria that was set by the independent panel. Many of those animals were trapped overnight in cages in wet and damp conditions that went beyond the criteria for humaneness that Natural England had set. And then when the people came to shoot them the next day, they were using ammunition that was meant to be used for free shooting at a distance to kill that animal at close range. And again, the humaneness issues around that, the horrific scenes that you can imagine were going on, were playing out day in, day out. And then Secret World last week did a fantastic job with their autopsy on the badger that the government had been trying to get hold of for months and claimed that was never from the cull zone. They got that autopsy completed, they got that information onto Channel 4 News, and we know 2 things. Firstly, there's no doubt that that badger came out of the cull zones. There's also no doubt that that badger was shot in the spine and wounded and moved quite a distance before it died, in a very painful and long, horrific way. And that's one of a fraction of these animals that were likely to have been killed in that way. We'll never know how many died like that, but I can tell you there's probably hundreds out there that did. So there was no humaneness to do with this. And the people that were doing this killing are not expert marksmen. One of them was up in court yesterday, the former gladiator, I don't know his name, I can't remember him now, fell asleep at the wheel trying to grab his radio, he said, and drove into a bus stop with a van full of dead badgers. That's probably the standard of the people that are involved in this cull. Many of them, I'm afraid, are just pest controllers at best. Many of them are not expert marksmen, they were very poorly paid, they weren't motivated to do this job properly, and they weren't being checked upon. So the humaneness was an absolute disaster. The cost was an absolute disaster. And then we come to the whole scientific basis of this. If you weren't testing any of the animals, how do you know how many of them had TB? How do you know as to whether this was going to be beneficial for reducing bovine TB or not? We know that it was also meant to monitor the effectiveness of free shooting. But only around 30% of the animals that were killed in those first 6 weeks in the culls were by free shooting. It failed miserably. You paid a large amount of money, taxpayers' money, for government officials to come in to cage trap and shoot animals, of which there are serious questions to be asked as to whether the National Farmers Union will ever repay those costs as they should do, but that's what actually happened. So this whole process has been a disaster. And there's no MP in there today that can stand up. There's no politician that, in my view, shows why Owen Paterson is that can stand up and defend this disaster. So we need to get to a conclusion on this. The problem is that there are many vested interests who want to keep this going. Landowners and farmers and other groups that don't want to accept they're wrong, don't want to accept that the wildlife lobby that you are could in any way influence the outcome of this process. There's too much to be lost here. It's not just about badgers, as others were saying, it's about the whole issue of protection of wildlife species. It's about how and who takes the decisions on killing them in the countryside. And there are many, I'm afraid, in the National Farmers Union and other bodies that will never ever accept the public opinion, and people like you should get in the way of that process. And let's just think a moment about some of that science we heard about and the BBC problem. Forever, Owen Paterson and others have been telling us that what actually happened in Ireland was a good example to follow. But what have they done in Ireland? They spent tens of millions of pounds killing hundreds of thousands of badgers. They've still got a significant problem of TB in their herds. They've killed those animals in the most inhumane and disgusting way. They've used snaring, they've used gassing, they've shot those animals. Yes, there are skips regularly full of dead badgers in Ireland, and many of the areas of the country you don't find badgers in anymore. Does anyone in this country think that's the way we should deal with our wildlife? Does anyone think we should sit silently by and allow this government just to follow that Irish example? No. And let's have a look at those numbers in terms of reducing the disease. The European Commission gave evidence to the EFTA Select Committee in the House here in 2012 in the autumn. They came along and they said two things. Firstly, we move 13 million cattle in this country a year. That's more than anywhere else in Europe. And also we do it against a background of very poor biosecurity controls, very poor cattle movement controls, and very poor, and in some cases, no testing at all for TB in the way that it should be done. And what the Commission quite rightly said is, listen, a lot of the money that we're giving to you for your compensation scheme is coming from European funds. So what we want to see is that we're using those wisely and you're getting control of this. If you do move 13 million cattle, and we'd like to see that come down, you've got to start coming down on biosecurity, start coming down on control movements, and start improving your TB testing systems. Now the National Farmers Union, the government said, oh my God, we can't do that, it's more expense, more trouble. Lots of people moaning and complaining. You could have read articles up and down in the farming press. But at the end of the day, they had to put those measures in place. So from January 2013, all of that went into the system. And what have we seen? In 12 months, we've seen a 13.5% drop, 13.5% announced yesterday by DEFRA, in the number of cattle slaughtered for TB in this country. Okay? The best you could ever get from culling badgers, based upon the scientific evidence we do have, is over 9 years we might get 16%. And it probably would be far, far lower. So we've almost matched that in 1 year of just tighter biosecurity controls. In Wales, they've taken it down by nearly 33%, so they've doubled it. An amazing result, again, by getting on top of it. Again, there's no logic anymore to say that culling badgers is the way to deal with this problem. It isn't. We're not just being sentimental about these animals. We all want to find a solution to the problem. But culling these animals at great cost, at great public anger, causing huge divisions between the countryside and the cities, and between people who care about wildlife and those who believe that they're supporters and farmers, is not going to help anyone. So we must find a better way. Now the NFU has a new president, Morag Raymond. He's a Welsh dairy farmer. He's a man I've worked with in the past, hard-working farmer, worked diligently for the NFU. I think will be a good ambassador for the farming industry. But he now has to look at his native Wales and say, hold on a minute. They've actually got it right. What they've done without a huge waste of taxpayers' money, without thousands of people marching up and down the country, without numerous debates in the House of Commons, without loads of media attention, much of which is really negative about the National Farmers Union, they've just got on, they've tightened the biosecurity, they've introduced the measures that need to be made to work, and they are, and they've vaccinated badgers. You know, for £980,000, they've vaccinated nearly 1,300 badgers. And we've spent the best part of 10 million trying to kill 1,800 plus. That makes no sense whatsoever. So I think Wales is the example to look to. And I was really pleased that the Welsh Food Minister said that the incompetence and the arrogance and stupidity of the British government in following the cull policy have been an absolute disaster. Good for Wales, good for devolution, and good for common sense. Thank God for that. But there's something special about British people, in my view. We care passionately about wildlife. We care passionately about conservation and the environment. And this government have run roughshod over all of those concerns. It doesn't matter what the issue is, they just haven't tackled it. Climate change policy has been put in the hands of a man who doesn't even believe climate change exists. Fracking has not been reviewed in terms of its environmental impact, and licenses are being issued to expand operations without any proper public consultation. Our most endangered birds in this country, hen harriers and golden eagles, are being poisoned on shooting estates that I'm afraid members of our royal family go to, who quite rightly, and I support them, trying to defend wildlife in Africa, but it's wrong and it is hypocritical. I've been on the record to say that they don't also take wildlife crime of that type seriously. We used to have a minister, Richard Benyon, in government who refused even to meet wildlife groups to discuss a closed season. He said, we've got a voluntary code that the British shooting bodies have all signed up to, that's fine with me. But what he forget to mention is I'm actually a big estate manager myself and landowner, and I'm a big supporter of shooting as well. So, you know, these conflicts of interest in government are a real problem at times, and they've not helped themselves with trying to tackle that. When we talk to the chief whips and others in the party, the Conservatives are telling us that this is political poison. They're telling us that the MPs in different seats are getting more concerns raised on badger culling than most other issues in their mailbag these days, and they're getting increasingly twitchy ahead of election coming up. That is people power. That's why you're beginning to have an impact. That's why these guys in there are beginning to think again. But they're coming under a lot of pressure from that farming and from that landowning industry I spoke about earlier. And we've got to keep pushing that voice of reason, that voice of compassion, the caring society that makes this country so special, that allowed charities like the RSPCA to develop here and care for the wild and the Badger Trust, allowed individuals to come together because they cared so much, brings tens of thousands of people onto the streets of our cities to say that we want to protect these animals. That's something that all of us should be proud about in this country. That's what makes us special. And I don't care what politicians tell me goes on in America and New Zealand and Australia and Ireland. What I care about is what we do here in Britain, what we do with our wildlife, how we make decisions about how we will protect it for the future. You know, I've been at the Badger Trust just over a week, and a few things, you know, to share with you. Firstly, I'm getting calls all the time of concerns about illegal killing of badgers. You know, one farm worker's already got to us and said, listen, I think, you know, the person I've been working with has been gassing them illegally for years, and we're examining that. Lots of concerns about large numbers of badgers being dumped on the road in what are suspicious circumstances, where again, we're looking at each individual case where we can. What I'd like to see is that we will have thousands and thousands of individuals in groups like the Badger Trust for years to come that will become a huge, strong network across this country, a firewall that will be built around these badgers for the future, so that every time a politician, no matter what party, comes back to this issue, and they will, and they'll say, we think we might need to kill them, we will pop up in large numbers, we will protest, we will write to MPs, we will lobby, we will use social media, and we will make it very clear that anything you do will come at a very high cost. It will cost you votes, it will cost you popularity, and you leave those animals alone, because those badgers have been exploited, they've been killed, and they've been dealt with in such a disgusting way for so many years. They deserve protection, they deserve decent treatment, and we will make sure they have it for many years to come. What's really worried me, and someone who worked in government for many years in industry too, is how the politics has overtaken the science. How the chief scientific advisor in DEFRA, how the chief veterinary officer have become political stooges to a large degree in terms of the debate about going forward on this. They are meant to be impartial scientific advisors. It's their job to represent the concerns that we all have here and not allow the politicians to just run roughshod over what the science is telling us. And I'm afraid that has failed miserably. Natural England as an agency of government has also failed miserably. There are good people in that organisation working day in, day out, who do know the science, who believe in conservation, join that organisation or have been in it for many years because they care about it. But I'm afraid its leadership is lacking. There are political appointments, people with vested interest in dairy and farming and other industries that I'm afraid are too keen to take a view that basically fits with just the National Farmers Union position or this government's position. The scientific advisors are not listened to. You should never ever have extended those badger culls. No way you should have extended them in Gloucestershire. No way you should have extended them in Somerset. There was no justification for that. The Natural England Board knew that. Their scientific advisors knew that. But the politicians won the day, and off they went to kill more of these animals. That is wrong. We're saying to the Labour Party and the other parties in government, you go back into the polls in a year's time. We want a better system of government for protecting wildlife in this country. What I'd like to see is an independent wildlife protection agency that is completely separate from DEFRA, completely separate from the influence of the farming, fishing and other industries that basically have their own interests and not wildlife protection at heart, has its own budget, its own advisory panel with respected ecologists and wildlife experts, people like Bill that would give them advice and they would listen to it, and would be there for us to take our concerns up and be there to influence what goes on in this place. Have an agency in government that's strong, an agency that will protect wildlife, an agency that will stand up and take difficult decisions. Because if we don't have that, this will get worse. What we will see is that more decisions are taken that are based only on short-term economic and political interests. The animals will lose every time. And we are the only thing between them being destroyed and the politicians getting the message. And it is our government. We fund it, we pay for it. And we should have a right of what it looks like and how it works. And if it's going wrong, we should make everyone aware of it. So when we come to this next election, wildlife groups like the Badger Trust, Care for the Wild and others will be working together with the political parties to develop manifesto commitments that I think and I hope will change the way we deal with these problems in the future. I think the politicians are beginning to wake up to this. I think they realise actually that by shutting their eyes to the concerns of the British people on wildlife protection, that it's going to cost them votes, that it's fundamentally wrong, and that basically they're not even going to help the people that the NFU say they're concerned about. You know, farmers do a very important job in this country. They provide the food for the nation in difficult times. They are ensuring that we can be fed into the future. They are guardians of the landscape and they are guardians of the countryside. However, they don't have a free pass to kill wildlife. They don't have a free pass not to be examined and questioned about what they're doing. And if they truly want to have our support, and remember in years gone by, farmers did not have a good reputation. They worked hard to get it back. But I think the badger cull has put them back a long way on that front. And what I'd like to say to the NFU and farmers in general is, listen, we're not your enemies. We will work with you. I'll be up in Derbyshire next week working with farmers who are vaccinating badgers. There are wildlife trusts and other groups up and down this country that will dedicate time and resources to help you get on top of this disease and this problem. We are aware of the impact socially. We are aware of the economic impact for you. But let's not kill these animals. It makes no sense. You stop the killing, we start the talking. You stop the killing, we start the talking. It's as simple as that. It will not be the other way around. We will not come to the table. We will not give up our principles to work with you if you continue to push this cull against all scientific animal welfare and economic common sense, which is what we're seeing at the moment. All of you, please keep fighting. Please join the Badger Trust. Please support Care for the Wild and other charities, because we are making a difference. We are waking people up to this. We are getting to a point now in Britain where wildlife is now becoming a key political issue. And it's one that's going to have an impact, not just now, but for generations to come. And I think people will say that it was 2013, 2014 and the badger cull that changed attitudes toward wildlife in this country and created a better place for us all to live in. Yes, where we care about the future of our farmers, but we care about the future of our wildlife as well. That's a better world for us, a better world for everyone. Thank you very much.
Oh, see, I should have. Shall we go back to the venue? I would just be I don't know, I keep thinking, please, no, I'm sure you have to see everything like me, but you don't know so many people. That's going on in there, the debate.